Hi everyone, my name's Virgo and I am a mental health campaigner. I work all over the world with schools, corporates and hospitals, and also do a huge amount of work with the government in the UK. I predominantly look at things around eating disorders and diagnosis, but also looking a little bit more broadly around mental health, making sure that everyone feels okay talking about things. It is absolutely fantastic to be here today at the Getahead Festival, talking about my own personal experience of recovery from an eating disorder. Just a couple of things before I kind of set out the session and kick off. I just wanted to highlight the fact that the way that I talk about my experience is very honest. The content shouldn't be triggering to anyone in the room, but if there is anything that I say that bothers you, do feel free to kind of log off if that works best for you, or I will leave my contact details at the end. So I'm more than happy for you to reach out and ask any questions that might have come up for you. So the session this morning, I'm going to be talking a little bit about my personal experience of recovery from an eating disorder. I'm going to be talking a little bit about those practical things that you can do to manage your well-being in the more kind of broader sense, and then also looking a little bit more closely at actually how we can deal with our emotions during this time of current turmoil and uncertainty. And then I'm going to end with a little snippet and a little update on my Dump the Scales campaign as well. My story began on the 8th of May in 1990. I grew up in Bristol. I was one of 5 children. I didn't have a particularly challenging upbringing. Everyone kind of got along and functioned and seemed fairly together most of the time. When I was 9, I had my first lot of therapy. For some reason, I found it really difficult to express any sort of emotion. Whether it was happiness, whether it was sadness, there was something in my brain that didn't quite click. And my mum thought the only solution to all of this was to send me for 1 hour of therapy every single Thursday lunchtime. So I'd leave school and go and see this therapist. We'd do little bits of artwork. She'd get me to write bad habits on a piece of paper and put them into a tissue box. And every single week I would sit there and think, what should and shouldn't I be saying? What's the right and wrong answer? What would all my friends be doing in this situation? After 6 months of that, nothing had changed for me in the slightest. I didn't really fully understand why I had to have the therapy. I thought the whole thing was a little bit of a waste of time, and I just didn't really get it. Like, why do people have to talk about their emotions? When it finished, I went back to school and kind of continued through the rest of junior school. I was quite happy at this point, so I didn't really think it was an issue that I struggled to deal with things. When I got to secondary school, though, things got a little bit harder. My older brother, who is now a wonderful person, back when I was growing up, he was really angry a lot of the time. He ran away from home an awful lot. He often ended up in A&E after fighting with my dad. And being that middle child, I made it my responsibility to try and fix this entire family dynamic. I went and found James when he ran away from home, or would sit with him for hours in A&E, just trying to calm him down, so that when we finally got home, we would have this little bit of peace and quiet before going to school the next day. Around that time as well, when I was 12, 13 years old, I was also sexually abused for around 8-9 months. And throughout that whole period of time, I didn't talk to anyone about it. I felt really guilty and really ashamed about it. When it finished, the man went off, got married, and I just thought, because he'd moved on with his life, that actually I had to find a way to deal with all of this stuff going on. I had to find a way to process all of those emotions. But the problem was, I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to deal with what was going on. And I also just felt so embarrassed about the whole thing. I blamed myself for all of it. That was when I started to hear this voice in my head. And that voice was the anorexia. And it was like having this best friend with me the entire time. It gave me this real value and sense of purpose every single day, controlling me from the moment I got up in the morning to the moment that I went to bed in the evening. It told me what I should eat, what I should drink, and how much exercise I should do. And every time I did what it told me to do, I just felt absolutely amazing. I got this real sense of kind of achievement of what it told me to do. And when I did it, it just felt incredible. I lived with this for the next 4 years, hiding it from every single person around me. I think part of me thought maybe it was a little bit weird. I had this voice in my head and it told me what to do. But actually, surely it was okay because the voice made me feel really, really good. A big thing for me was that I was afraid of telling someone about it because I was afraid they would take it away from me, that they would take it for themselves and be better at whatever the voice was telling them to do. During that 4-year period, there was the odd time when I kind of questioned that relationship with my head a little bit, but I tended to just keep going and keep plodding on with it. But towards the end of that 4-year period, that's when things began to get a bit harder for me. I went away with my school friends after our GCSEs, and we had this week of drinking and eating and going out. And I couldn't get my head around the fact that everybody else was totally okay to eat what they wanted to and drink what they wanted to. Because at that moment, that voice in my head was not really making me that happy. But actually, every time I had anything to eat or anything to drink, I just felt so awful. I was left with like this insane feeling of guilt and failing in my whole body. I would then look in the mirror and like everything would just look so awful and so horrible about me. After that week away, I didn't want to see any of my school friends for the rest of that summer holidays. When I was with them, I was in this conflict zone. I had to basically choose whether I wanted to make my friends happy by getting involved in things or whether I wanted to make that voice in my head happy. If I made my friends happy, then I knew that that guilt would just set in for so long afterwards. So it wasn't really worth it. That same summer holidays, I went to the dentist with my mum, and the dentist picked up on the fact that all of my back teeth had started to crumble due to the lack of food and the lack of calcium. My mum picked me up on it on the way home, and we had this massive argument about it. I made up all of these excuses about why I thought it was happening, blaming other things for it. By the time we got home, I was so angry with my mum that I decided to go for a run, and then hopefully the whole thing would blow over. And it did. I got home and we never talked about it again. It isn't my mum's fault we didn't talk about it, but actually my mum didn't really know how to talk about it. And I didn't make it very easy. I got so defensive anytime anyone tried to talk to me about it. After that summer holidays though, my whole life got completely shoved into the limelight. My school contacted my mum. I then went to my GP. And then I was finally referred to the Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services, so CAMHS. So I'm sure that some of you will have had experiences of CAMHS, whether it's directly yourself or whether it's through those people that you're supporting or people in your life. But being a young person and going to CAMHS is absolutely terrifying. I want you to shut your eyes now and I want you to imagine it. I want you to imagine that you're a 15, 16-year-old child. You're feeling a little bit uneasy. You're sitting in the car driving to this hospital, driving to a mental health hospital, where there is still so much stigma. You get there, get out the car, walk over the car park, and your eyes are constantly darting around you, trying to work out what's actually going to happen. Your brain is kind of flooded with these questions of things that are going to come up. What are they going to say? What are they going to do? What kind of people are going to be there? There's this overload of stuff going on in your head. You get to the front doors and you walk down a long corridor. The waiting room's on the right. You head straight in. You sit down in the corner of the room, furthest away from the door possible, and your eyes start to explore the room. On one wall, there's a massive notice board with things like OCD, depression, anxiety, eating disorders. And you're sitting there looking at it, trying to work out which one you've got. Do you have any of those things? Why am I even here? Then someone else comes into the waiting room, another young person, a boy. He sits directly opposite you. You notice all down his arms cuts. Your brain again starts to go into overdrive. You start to create this story up around about that boy, trying to work out exactly why he's here. What's he done to be here? And then, piercing through that silence, they call your name. You pull yourself up and you follow them down another corridor, through another set of double doors that slam so loudly behind you, it echoes through the whole of that hospital. You walk into the room on the left. The clinician shuts the door behind you. He introduces himself, has a bit of a chat with you, asks you why you think you should be here. Is that a trick question? Surely they know why I'm here. He explains that you're going to have to fill in a lot of questionnaires so they can get a little bit of an understanding around things. You look down at all of these questionnaires. The first one is about judging your mood. Judging your mood on a scale of 1 to 10. And you're just sitting there looking down at it. What do you say? You've never, ever, ever had to even start exploring things like this. You never have to explore your emotions before. What's the right answer? What answer do they want you to give? I circled 5 in that appointment on every single one of those questionnaires because I didn't know what was the best place to put myself. I didn't know where I should be sitting on that spectrum. So I thought maybe this would be the best opportunity for people to just back off a little bit. They then give you another load of questionnaires where you have to actually write stuff, where you have to fill in all of these little boxes. You're sitting there staring at it again. Do you tell people the truth? Do you tell people that every single evening you get into bed because you've cried over any amount of food that you've had that day? Or that your alarm goes off at 3 a.m. so that you can go running before anyone else gets up? But then there's that fear, isn't there? That fear that if you start sharing all of that stuff, maybe people will start to interfere. Maybe people will start to kind of take control and take over your life. Once you've completed that questionnaire, you sit back in that chair, your eyes directly staring at the floor. You don't want to be there. Your mind starts to wander to food and calories and exercise. You start to think about how you can avoid dinner that evening, what time you can set your alarm for. And at the same time, your whole body is just aching all over. The appointment ends rather sharply. They tell you they're going to send a letter, a follow-up, and that you have to come back the following week. You leave that appointment and you're quite confused. You don't really know what's going on. You don't really still have any understanding around it. The next week carries on as it was before. It carries on, you doing the things you're doing. And for me, it was all around exercising as much as I could, causing arguments so that I wouldn't have to eat, and being just so defensive and so on guard all the time. That second appointment came around and they diagnosed me with anorexia. I didn't think I had anorexia. I was in this complete denial about it. I thought to have anorexia, you had to be stick thin and look like a skeleton. And I just couldn't see myself that way. I just didn't get it. They then went on and started trying to scare me, telling me that if I didn't start eating, my hair would keep falling out, that I wouldn't be able to go running, that I wouldn't be able to learn to drive, that I wouldn't be able to go to school. And then eventually I would end up in hospital. I sat there and everything went in one ear and out the other ear. I had no idea really why I was there. I didn't believe anything anyone was saying to me. At that appointment, they told me that I'd have to come back weekly for appointments, every single Tuesday afternoon. When I got home that evening, I Googled the word anorexia to have some understanding of what it could be. I came across this minefield of other information on the internet, kind of exploring everything left, right, and centre, trying to work out what I had that was wrong, what people were saying was the matter with me, and actually whether what I was doing was really that dangerous. I was convinced they were all really jealous of me. I was convinced that I'd found this magical solution to life and they were just trying to take it away from me. I continued at CAMS for the next 5 months as an outpatient. Like I said, going weekly for these appointments. Every single week, I would manage to trick the system. I managed to trick it so that my weight would either stay the same or it would go up. And every week I created these amazing win-win situations. I was really happy because people were starting to back off a little bit. My mum was really happy because she thought my weight was going up. And the hospital were happy because they thought that maybe things were working. What it also meant for me was that I could go into these therapy sessions and just sit opposite this therapist, telling him that I'm fine, life's fine, everything's just fine. But I was not fine at this point. I was anything but fine. I hated a lot of the time what was going on in my head, but I had no way around it. I hated how out of control I felt when my mood would slip and plummet. I hated how nasty I was being to everyone around me who was trying to get me to eat. I continued over the next 5 months managing to trick that system. But 5 months in, and my mum picked me up from school about 40 minutes too early. I didn't have time that week to get myself all ready for that session. I sat in the car on the way to that hospital, so stressed. There was sweat kind of seeping through my palms, all down my back. everywhere. I was just getting so anxious and so on edge. I walked into that hospital and went straight into the bathroom to try and drink water out of a tap in the hope that maybe that would help my weight go up. But it didn't. And within 2 kind of seconds of arriving into that appointment, they weighed me and they realized that I'd been lying for the last 5 months. At that appointment, I lost pretty much all of my independence. My mum contacted my school, so they were constantly on my case. She rang my gym so that if I ever went to the gym would then ring my mum and she would come and get me, which in itself was just so humiliating. I was trying to find other ways that I could get around doing what I wanted to do. I hated people constantly watching me. My days turned into these kind of long days of trying to secretly exercise, to these massive family arguments every evening around food. And if I didn't have the energy to argue with my parents, I'd eat my dinner really quickly, go upstairs to the bathroom and turn on the shower, lock the door, and then spend the next couple of hours making myself sick, making sure that every single thing was out of my body. I'd analyze it in the toilet bowl, trying to work it all out, making sure that everything was just not there anymore. I would then sit on the bathroom floor, just so alone, pulling myself into the shower to then sit on that shower floor with the water just pouring over me. I had no energy at this point to do anything. Every one of those evenings, I would just sit there and just wish that this whole thing would end. Wish that something would just change. There's something in my head would just let me kind of start to process things and start to accept that I needed support. Every single one of those nights, I would get into bed, and the last thing I would think before I went to bed is, tomorrow's going to be different. Tomorrow I'm going to get up and something is going to have changed. But the reality is, the next morning I'd get up, my alarm would go, I'd look in the mirror and just hate what I saw. I'd then weigh myself and it just wasn't good enough. It just was never good enough. I'd then pull on my running stuff into this kind of aching body, and my brain would tell me to just do one more day of this, just one more day and everything will be better. My brain just would not let me eat. And then a month after that whole incident at the hospital, I hit that complete rock bottom and my heart nearly stopped. And I was admitted to a mental health hospital where I then spent the next year of my life trying to recover. So learning about food, learning about exercise, and learning to talk about how I felt. So the hospital that I was in was a pretty standard hospital, as hospitals go. There was about 25 of us in there, aged from 11 right up to 18. I was in a room with 3 other girls, 2 of which had an eating disorder and 1 girl who had OCD. And then across the hospital, there was a huge range of illnesses. I didn't go into an eating disorder specific hospital, but I went into a more generic mental health hospital, which actually in the long run, I think was so much better for my recovery. The main issue for me though, which I've already touched on slightly, was that when I arrived in that hospital, I still didn't think there was anything the matter with me. I still couldn't get my head around it. The people were calling me anorexic. I just couldn't see it at all. I spent the first 3 days in hospital being encouraged to eat and being told I had to lie down. I was on like 24/7 surveillance, people constantly checking in on me, people constantly watching me. I shouted a lot, I cried a lot. I hated the fact that I was in the hospital, and I actually blamed my mum for a lot of that. I thought it was her fault that she just couldn't cope with me, that maybe she didn't love me as much as she loved everyone else because I was in that hospital. On the Friday night, someone came in to see me, one of the nurses. She brought with her these massive pieces of paper. She laid the paper out on the floor and she marked on where my head was and where my feet were. She then got me to draw how I imagined myself. Once I'd done that, she got me to lie down on that exact same piece of paper and she traced around the outside of me. She then got me to stand up and look back down at that paper. And the images were just so different. I thought at first she'd lied to me, that she'd somehow tricked me. But I had this realization then that there was something seriously wrong with the way that I viewed myself, and that maybe there was something the matter with me. On that Friday night, I told myself that I was just going to start eating, because at least then I could get out of the hospital and do exactly what I wanted to do. But over the next year, I gradually began to accept that I needed that support. I did so much therapy when I was in hospital, and having that space to actually really be heard, but also just working through things in a much more healthy way. I did lots of one-to-one therapy, I did a bit of group therapy, a little bit of family therapy, but that didn't really work with my family dynamic. But the main bit of group therapy that worked for me is probably the most basic form of therapy I have ever done. After every single meal time, everyone with an eating disorder used to go into the room next door, and we would talk about how that meal made us feel. Like I said, it sounds ridiculous and so basic. But actually what it did was it gave us the chance to really voice those feelings. It gave us the chance to actually say that from eating that potato, I felt really guilty. Because of having that extra portion today, I felt like a failure. And actually giving you that chance to really vocalize everything that's going on in your head. The other thing that this group did was it gave us the chance to actually pick each other up on things. I'm sure that some of you will know that anorexia is an extremely competitive illness. You pretty much compete with everyone around you, but when there are other anorexics, you're competing on this whole other level. What it means is that actually when you're in a hospital with people with eating disorders, that competition steps up a whole other level again. And it means that you're constantly looking around, kind of judging exactly what everyone else is having. You're judging how much people are stood up in the corner of a room. You're judging whether someone's potatoes are maybe smaller than yours. Or when you're at a mealtime, you're trying to work out if someone has managed to sneak some of the food away. And because of this constant competition going on, it becomes really toxic. But what this group did was it gave us the chance to actually confront each other on this stuff, to pick each other up on this so that we can then try and focus just on our own recoveries. The other thing that really helped me when I was in hospital was another quite basic thing, actually, but it was a complete game changer. With anorexia, quite often, it makes you feel completely invincible. You think that your life will just carry on and that everything will be okay. And the reality is you can function for a really long time with an eating disorder. In fact, you can function with pretty much any mental health problem for a long time. You might be sitting here now watching this, and you might just be feeling a bit bleh. You might have like a bit of a dull ache in your tummy. You might be thinking, oh, if I just go and do an extra run today, then I'll feel much better. If I just drink a little bit more, then it will kind of numb all of those feelings and emotions. And yes, you find your high level way to function. And I know, I've done it, I've been there, I know what it's like. And it sometimes just feels like the easier option to do. But at some point you have to tackle that thing. And if you don't, it will catch up on you. And so for me, it took hitting that rock bottom to actually realize there was so much other stuff that I wanted out of life. I wanted to go traveling one day. I wanted to go to uni. And the biggest thing for me is I really want to have my own family one day. And none of this stuff would be possible unless I really started to focus on my recovery and get to that better space. But it was hard work. In fact, it was probably the hardest year of my life being in hospital. Having to first accept that I needed that support, then also accepting the weight change and accepting the fact that my weight seemed to go up so much faster than mentally it was able to keep up. I also had to put up with the comments that people make around your weight. Things that people maybe feel is so harmless, but actually can be really detrimental. Things like when someone tells you you look really healthy. Actually, for someone who's had an eating disorder, that is not a good compliment. In fact, what your brain will do when you get that compliment is it distorts it. It tells you that you're ugly, that you're a failure, that you've let yourself go. It amplifies all of those really negative things. But you have to find a way to take ownership of that and push back when people say them. So after that year in hospital, I was discharged. So I went straight to uni after hospital. Unfortunately, because I turned 18 when I was in hospital, despite the fact that I had kind of the ability and was able to stay for the couple of months after my 18th birthday, when I left hospital eventually, I just fell through that transitional gap. But at this point, it didn't matter. I went to uni. I knew what I had to do to stay well. When I left hospital, I was extremely institutionalized, but like I said, it worked. I knew exactly what I had to eat at certain points in the day to manage my recovery and manage my weight. But over that 3-year period at uni, I gradually began to push myself with it. I gradually began to kind of adapt to the situation and began to challenge my recovery. Straight after uni, I set myself this goal to do all of this stuff that I'd wanted to do when I was in hospital. I went and worked abroad for a little bit. I traveled a lot. I ran marathons. I spent loads of time with my friends. And I think I probably put quite a lot of pressure on myself to actually make up for that year that I felt like I'd lost when I was in hospital. But the problem with mental health problems, and I'm sure that some of you will again be aware of this, is if you don't manage them, if you don't know what your coping mechanisms are, if you don't know what those triggers are, there is this potential that at some point things will come back. And for me, at this point in my life, kind of the couple of years, kind of 5-6 years out of hospital, I kind of lulled myself into this false sense of security that I was 100% recovered. I wasn't calorie counting, I wasn't obsessively exercising, and I felt like I was just in this amazing headspace. In fact, I never really thought about it. I thought like the eating disorder had basically happened to someone else, and it was something that just was not a part of my life. But unfortunately, in 2016, after being out of hospital for 8 years, I did actually relapse. So my grandma had dementia for the last 5-6 years of her life. And towards the end of her life, her memory was getting very, very bad. When I was with my grandma, she didn't actually know who I was, but I always hung on to the fact that when we were together, we just had this really lovely time together. We'd lie in her bed and read poetry. We'd maybe just kind of reminisce about loads of things that happened to her as a child, the things that she could remember. Just before she passed away, she got put into a care home. I went down to see her the Friday after she'd gone in and had this really, really bad visit with her. I didn't really want to be there that day, if I'm honest. I found the whole care home thing just really shocking. And I convinced myself that she looked completely different in that care home on that Friday than she'd looked just that week before. After being there for about an hour, I asked my mum to take me back to the station so that I could go back to London. I cried my entire journey back to London. I felt so awful about the fact I hadn't been patient with her. I felt like I'd really let her down. I'd let my mum down, I'd let my grandma down, I'd let everyone else down. And I didn't know what to do about it. By the time I got back to London, I'd kind of tried to convince myself that it was all going to be okay. In fact, it was going to be brilliant. I was going to be back that following Friday. I had it all planned out in my head. We were going to go for this walk around the care home grounds. We were going to sew the name tags into her jumper that we got her that week before. I was going to sit in bed and just read her poetry like we used to do and reminisce and do all of that stuff that I really wanted to do with her. By the end of the weekend, I'd kind of got over the fact the visit had been bad. Until my mum rang me on the Wednesday morning. She told me that I had to come straight to Oxford. I literally must have travelled across London so fast. I got up from my desk and just went straight away to get the next train to Oxford. I was so stressed on that train journey, not knowing what was going to happen when I got there. I waited for my sister at the station, and we then got a lift to the care home. But we were a little bit too late. In fact, everyone in my family was too late to even say goodbye to her. I felt so awful about this. I felt like it was my fault completely. I'd been for a run that morning and hadn't run quite as fast as I normally do. And I thought maybe that was the reason why she's not here anymore. Maybe this whole thing is my fault. I went back to London that evening. I didn't know what I was going to do to process things. I thought that I just had to find a way to switch off those emotions and get rid of that horrible feeling in my tummy. The next morning, I went straight back to work as my way of coping. I basically tried to work consistently for the next 2 weeks, but it wasn't really working. And then that voice started to come back in my head, slowly but surely, every single day. Every day just telling me to just skip lunch today and things will be okay. Just do a bit of extra exercise and this whole thing will be fine. Let's distract you with counting your calories again and thinking about restricting. And it worked. For the next few weeks, things gradually began to feel better again. But the frustrating thing was I knew what was happening. I knew that at any point, I could lose that complete control. When I left children's services, I told myself that I would never, ever go back into adult services. So I really needed to get back on top of this. But I kept telling myself, it's going to be okay. I'm just going to do this for a couple of weeks. And then when I gradually began to feel better again, I'm just going to switch it back off and I'll get back on that road to recovery. But that's not how anorexia works. You cannot get up one morning and decide you want to be anorexic and then 3 weeks later decide you don't want to be. What I was doing was really dangerous. A couple of months later, my mum came to London to see me. She asked me what was going on. She was slightly concerned because I'd forgotten birthdays, I hadn't been engaging really with anyone, and I'd also lost a little bit of weight in that time. Had my mum done that to me 10 years before, I guarantee I would have shut her down and just told her to back off. But actually, I really needed someone to reach out to me. I wanted someone to just say, I know you're really struggling. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want someone to fix the situation. I wanted someone to just walk alongside me and help me get back to that better space. That evening, I rang my GP and managed to get a referral to the eating disorder service in Southwest London. My appointment came a couple of weeks later. My mum came with me. I wanted her there because despite being in my 20s, for me, it was just about kind of getting rid of some of that guilt that would happen if I reached out for that support. At that appointment, I gave my whole back history. I talked really honestly about what I was going through, what I was feeling, how my brain was working. I ticked every single box to access that therapy, apart from one box. And at the end of my appointment, they weighed me and they realized that I wasn't actually underweight. So surely I didn't have an eating disorder. I left that appointment and I felt like a completely fake anorexic person. That competitive part of my brain immediately kicked in, telling me that I was attention seeking, telling me that no one believed me, that I was a failure, that I should feel really guilty. And I was constantly in this overdrive. My days turned into getting up in the morning and going to the gym, crying my entire tube journey into work, getting into work, putting on my makeup and pretending like everything is totally okay. I then get back on the tube in the evening, crying my way back to the gym, and then finally just go home and just feel completely emotionally and physically exhausted by everything going on inside me. I hated what was happening in my head, but I didn't know what to do about it. I continued on over the next couple of weeks, just feeling a complete loss at what to do. I was feeling really suicidal a lot of the time, and just combining that with the fact that my brain was just not functioning properly with anything else, I knew that I had to do something. I had to make a decision. I could either just end everything altogether, which I thought at the time would be so much better for everyone around me. No one would have to worry about me. My mum wouldn't have to text me to check up. My sister wouldn't be thinking about whether her younger sister or older sister, whether they're still struggling, whether this is happening, whether people would be embarrassed about me. But after thinking about it for quite a while, I ended up going back to my GP. And I was kind of thinking, I'm just going to give this one more shot. I'm going to give it one more go to see if I can get back to a better space. And if I can, then that'll be amazing. And if I can't, then I'll just give up. I asked the GP to give me anything they could to help me feel better. They ended up putting me on citalopram, which is a type of antidepressants. Before I went on citalopram, I was very, very against medication. I thought that it was a weak thing to do. I thought it would unmotivate me, that it would change who I was as a person, and that maybe it would make me put on loads and loads of weight, so that anorexic part of my brain would just be this complete mess. But after a couple of days of umming and ahhing about whether to take it, I decided that I just had to get on with it and deal with it. I took the first tablet on a Sunday morning and felt fine. That evening, got into bed and went straight to sleep. 3 hours later, I was wide awake. I was pacing all over my small flat, picking up books, turning the telly on, scrolling on Instagram, doing anything I could to try and help myself go to sleep. At about 4:30, eventually I fell back asleep, only for my alarm to go off an hour and 20 minutes later. The next 2 weeks were exactly like this. A lack of sleep, headaches constantly. I had a really sore tummy a lot of the time, and I actually felt a lot worse being on the medication than I felt before going on it. I didn't tell anyone at work that I'd gone on it because I was quite embarrassed about it at this point. So I wasn't able to adapt my working environment to actually fit within that. And had I been able to do that, I probably would have got over the side effects much quicker. But after that first few weeks of being on the medication, things did gradually begin to get better. I stuck with it and I kept powering through. I wrote myself a load of meal plans. I got myself a personal trainer to help me get on top of my exercise obsession. And I gradually began to book things in, tell people about what was going on, and book exciting kind of adventures and travels to help keep me motivated. I spent the next year and a half making this massive effort to get back to this better space in my head. For me, my recovery is ongoing. It's something that I have to manage on probably like a month-by-month basis. I have really, really good days with it when I don't even think about it. But I also have days when I'm conscious about it, days when my brain can be really, really nasty, days when it picks me up on stuff. But for me, it's okay that I have those bad days. It doesn't make me weak, it doesn't make me a failure, but it's just part of where I'm at with things. And for me, it's more about actually how we manage ourselves on those bad days. What do we do on those bad days? Do we talk about it? Do we get that support? Or do we slip back into those unhealthy coping mechanisms? So what I wanted to do quickly is just share a couple of those practical things that help me to stay in that kind of better headspace. So the first thing is exercise. And when I talk about exercise, I mean any physical activity. It's not running every day. It's not going to the gym all the time. It's not working out obsessively in your bedrooms. But it's about getting out and about. It's about being in the sunshine when the weather's nice. It's about going for a walk, whatever it might be that you like doing. But it's about just getting out and enjoying that fresh air. For me, my relationship with exercise has been a little bit hit and miss. I was a very good long distance runner when I was at school. I then got on well, and the exercise became something that I was obsessed with. When I went into hospital, I wasn't allowed to run for the first 10 months I was there. For my final 2 months of hospital, I was allowed to go running with one of the nurses 3 times a week. What that did for me was it helped to kind of get me to understand about exercising in that healthy way. I changed my whole idea around it and didn't need to do it to punish myself anymore, but actually doing it for that right headspace. I do still have to be mindful of how much exercise I do. I have to be mindful that I've got the right support around me and people that can pick me up on it. But for me now, it's this massive part of my recovery and something that really, really helps me to stay on track. I don't need to exercise in order to eat food, but I think for me, it's changed that relationship around food and exercise. The exercise gives me some kind of extra confidence. It helps me to actually focus on the things my body can do and not as a way to punish myself. The next thing is around knowing what our triggers are. So every single one of us has things in life that trigger us, things that stress us out, make us anxious. And I encourage you to think about what these might be. When we've identified a trigger, what we can then do is work out how we can manage it and how we can deal with that in a different situation. The third thing is around challenging myself. And this is something that's quite unique to me, but actually something that I think works for a lot of us. What I mean by challenging myself is something that I agreed to do about 2.5 years ago now. So I got to this point in my recovery when I was like this functioning anorexic person. I went to the same restaurants. I drank the same amount of alcohol each week. I ate the same foods, I had the same lunches, whatever it might be. I was just quite restricted in what I was doing. 2.5 years ago, I decided that I was going to challenge this every single day. So every day I will challenge myself with food. Whether it's, I don't know, going out to a restaurant that I don't normally go to, or going to a friend's house and not asking what's on the menu, or when I'm looking at a menu, actually choosing something that I want to have and not something that the eating disorder wants me to have. It's hard work, and that's the reality of it. It's something that I have to push myself to do. But the more I do it, the better it is for me and my recovery journey. I also make sure that meal times are enjoyable. So just making sure that kind of meal times are quite pleasant places, that there's no negative emotion at meal times, there's no arguments. I'm conscious of what I look at on social media. And for me, this includes just being mindful about the times of day that I might be scrolling. I know that when I have a really bad day, I do have a tendency to spend a lot of time scrolling on Instagram. And even though I might not be reading that content, actually quite often you're subconsciously taking it in. So just taking ownership of that and being mindful about it. I think as well, the other thing with social media is actually that whole comparison thing. We all do it. We all compare ourselves to someone else. And when we're doing it, I guarantee that we always come off so much worse than that other person. The other point of comparisons, I think, particularly at the moment, is around actually those kind of Instagram lives that people are doing with personal trainers or exercise classes. And actually thinking to yourself, are you doing it because you want to do the exercise class and because you're enjoying that? Or are you doing it so you can constantly be comparing your body to that person on the screens? Sometimes it is about taking that step back and actually thinking, what is this doing for me? Is it helping me? Is it helping me feel better about myself? And if it isn't, why am I looking at it? Social media can be so powerful when it's used in the right way. And I would encourage you to actually today maybe look through the things that you're following on social media. Look at people that you're following on Instagram and actually work out if they're the kind of accounts you want to follow, or whether, like I said, you want to take a step back and diversify what you're looking at. Then the final two come quite together actually. So the first thing is therapy. I do still have therapy. I have therapy probably once every fortnight. I recently went up to having therapy once a week, but I've now kind of stepped back a little bit to that fortnight again. I went back to therapy last June after spending the last 2 years going through a court case around the sexual abuse that happened to me as a child. I didn't go back to therapy because my eating was getting bad again, but because I knew that I just wasn't 100% okay with things. The therapy for me this time around has been amazing. I've been in a better headspace to actually kind of talk about all of that trauma that I've been through and actually reassess things that have happened in my life. There's nothing wrong with having therapy. It doesn't make us weak. It's nothing that we should be ashamed about, but some people just need it. And that is okay. I spent so long feeling embarrassed about the fact that I was a mental health campaigner, that I would talk very openly about my mental health, but yet I was having to have therapy. But actually, it's okay. It doesn't mean we don't have friends. But like I said, it's about knowing what we need at certain points within our recovery. And the final thing is just talking about how we feel. And I'm sure for a lot of us, this is something that's quite challenging. I know for me it is. I know that I find it so easy to broadcast my entire life on social media or to share openly about what I've been through. But I do find it hard at times to actually take that step back and talk to those really close to me about how I'm feeling. But it's so important that we have these people around us, that we have people that we can talk to. And it isn't about having people to fix us, because a lot of us don't want that. But it's about just having that space to feel really, really heard within things. So I wanted to, as well, as I mentioned at the start, talk to you a little bit actually about the things we can be doing right at this moment, with the whole of the COVID-19 going on and with other kind of things that may be cropping up for you. So the first thing that I want to emphasize is right now, there is no right way to feel. You might change how you feel from a day-to-day basis. I know that some days I change how I feel from an hour-to-hour basis. I get up in the morning and I'm in this amazing mood. In fact, last Monday, this is a good example. I got up in the morning and I felt fine. I had a nice weekend. It was sunny. I felt pretty chilled about things. I then did some work in the morning. And then for some reason at lunchtime, I just had this complete meltdown. I think for me, there was a number of things building up, and then gradually it just kind of hit me. And I spent about 45 minutes crying and shouting and just felt completely out of control with my emotions. The thing that made it slightly worse was during that whole period of time, I kept reminding myself how much time I was wasting crying and shouting and not being productive. But it's okay. These days will happen and we shouldn't feel bad about it. Yes, there's this pandemic going on, but our mental health is so, so important, and we cannot dismiss that and we cannot shut that down during this time. When the pandemic started, I know that I certainly began to see cracks in my recovery, things that were kind of flagging up as a bit like a red alert for me. So here's what I did. So I accepted that what was happening was something that was out of my control. I can't control when the gyms are reopening. I can't control what Boris Johnson is saying on a day-to-day basis about the virus. I can't control people that are really kind of maybe frustrating me slightly, who are sunbathing in parks when maybe they shouldn't be. And actually, I was just finding myself getting really angry at a lot of stuff going on. So what I did was I accepted what was happening. I then wrote a list of things that felt out of my control, wrote them down in my notebook, ripped them up and put them in the bin. I then went back to the basics and created a routine. I get up and go to bed at exactly the same time every single day. I have my lunch pretty much around the same time every day, and I have my dinner around the same time every day. It might seem ridiculous, particularly because I'm a freelancer, so I work such irregular hours anyway, but actually having some kind of routine really, really helped that. Within that routine, I also made sure that I got dressed and had a shower every single day and cleaned my teeth. Although some days I think I've probably been a little bit lax with that, to be honest. But actually on those days when I get dressed, when I shower, when I wash my hair, I just have such a much better day and I feel so much better mentally about things. I know sometimes it feels like really cool, like we can be in our loungewear all day, we can be in our PJs, but actually what I can guarantee is it's not great for our mental health. For me, a big thing that I had to do was to go and make sure that I had some safe foods in the house. And what I mean by safe foods, it's foods that I can eat in my recovery that don't cause me any anxiety, that don't make me feel guilty about it. And just making sure that I had a couple of those bits stocked up just in case I had a bad day. And then identifying my support network. So working out who I can talk to, who I can offload to. And a big thing for me within that was actually making sure that my therapy could then go remotely. So I had that space. Something that's really helped me as well is actually trying to think about other things when I'm ruminating. So a lot of us will get to the end of the day, or maybe just even in the day, and we'll start to go over things that have happened. We might find ourselves stuck in certain scenarios. And I know for me, actually having kind of been through trauma and being abused as a child, quite often I go through this rumination process through the day, then through the week, then through the month, and then I get stuck as a 13-year-old child. It's bizarre. And I have to find a way to manage that. So obviously I work through that with things like therapy. But actually one way of managing rumination, particularly at the moment, if you're calorie counting a lot or feeling like you're thinking about food and exercise, it's about training your brain to think about something else. Now when I feel like I'm starting to ruminate again, what I do is I think about something completely different, and it helps me to kind of ground myself in the present moment. I also make sure that I'm getting out once a day, so whether that's a walk or a run, things like that are really important. Again, touching on the social media aspects of just being mindful of what you're looking at, mindful of how much time you're spending scrolling through the news. And also, I think on social media, just being mindful of actually what you're looking at. So I know there'll be some people that I follow who get so opinionated about the virus. And actually that sort of stuff is just not helpful for me to be reading because it makes me angry, it gets me frustrated. So just being conscious of that sort of stuff. And then the final thing I wanted to pull out from this was just about being mindful of those signs around you. I have a relapse prevention plan in place, which is basically a list of things to look out for when I feel myself relapsing. We all need to be aware of those things in life, those triggers, those things that maybe start to slip a little bit, whether it's you're struggling with food or you're in recovery from being an alcoholic or whatever it might be, anything like that, being aware of those things that might be starting to trigger a little bit. So for me, it could be that I start exercising a bit more or that I start cutting out carbs. And actually when we are aware of that, it helps us to challenge it and have those conversations. And then on those days that life just feels so hard, because the reality is you will have those days. I'm not saying that to be really negative, but actually it's just the truth of it at the moment. It's important that we do keep going. So for me, on those really hard days, I make that extra effort to get up, get dressed, have a shower, and make sure that I'm clean. I remind myself that those feelings will pass, that I will begin to feel better again. I make sure that I do something for myself on those days, so whether that's going for a walk or having a cup of tea in the sunshine, something like that. And I also make sure that I have someone to talk to. And for me, like I said earlier, it's just about sending a text, telling someone that I'm struggling, knowing they can't fix that, but actually knowing that just by telling someone it really helps. And I know how difficult it is to talk about things. I spent the majority of my life not talking about things, but I promise you, the more we talk about things, the more it helps. And if you know someone who's struggling, if you've got someone in your life who maybe you haven't heard from a couple of days, a couple of weeks, why don't you send them that text now? Why don't you send that text and just reach out to them? I strongly believe that we have a responsibility to everyone around us to start talking about mental health. Yes, we're not all trained and we're not kind of there to fix everyone, but it's about just having those conversations and about reaching out for those people that need it. Because I guarantee the more we talk about things, the better it is, not just for us, but actually for those around us. And we gradually see this kind of support networks created across society where people feel able to talk so much more openly. And then the final thing that I just wanted to touch on just before I close is my campaign. So I launched Dump the Scales about a year and a half ago. The reason I launched the petition was because people with eating disorders are currently facing this massive injustice across society. People with eating disorders are getting turned away from services because they're not underweight enough. It is so frustrating that this is something that's still happening. So what I'm doing is I'm working with the government to try and change this. So far, the petition has over 100,000 signatures. I've taken it to Downing Street. It's been debated in Parliament a number of times. And a couple of months ago, I launched a resource with South London Mental Health Trust, so St George's Mental Health Trust in South London. The problem is, as I'm sure we all know, is that the government has so many different competing priorities. I'm trying to be political about this and say it diplomatically, but it's true. And quite often with eating disorders, people still have this real lack of understanding around it. We still think that to have an eating disorder, you have to be stick thin and underweight. But actually eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes. And actually we need to start opening up these conversations around this. We need to make sure that people can get that support. It would be amazing if you guys could sign the petition, share it. And if you're interested in the petition particularly, please do feel free to get in touch with me. Where I'm at with it now is that I want to get this resource rolled out across the rest of the country. This simple resource that just outlines service provision, that outlines how to have those conversations, and also just acts as a reminder that eating disorders aren't about being really underweight. So please do, like I said, have a look at it and get in touch if you're interested. But thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. I hope you guys found it interesting and insightful. And I really hope that actually it kind of opened your eyes up a little bit to actually what it's like to be in recovery. I think there's two things that I want to leave you with. The first thing is that just because someone looks healthy on the outside, whether that's a healthy weight, whether that's someone who maybe does their makeup or wears lipstick or wears a suit to work, remember that actually they might have a lot of other stuff going on. They might have stuff that they keep hidden from everyone. And it's important to just be mindful of that when we're communicating with others. And the other thing is just talk. It sounds so basic and so simple, but please, if you're struggling right now, please do reach out for that support. Find someone that you can talk to about it, whether that's a friend, a family, or whether it's Samaritans. Remember that we don't need to wait to crisis point until we start talking. But thank you everyone for tuning in, and my contact details are on the screen. So if you do have any other questions, do feel free to get in touch. But enjoy the rest of the festival, and I hope that you have a good rest of day. Thank you.